Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's episode. Instead of doing some gameplay, I thought I would just, jump on the bandwagon and put together a tier list. Recently, I was on the Scrub Games podcast and we went through a tier list. I think we nailed most of it. Um, Obviously, as expected, with like a collab in that sense, everybody's going to have different ideas um, around, where we all think that leaders would place or, play styles, things like that. So I thought I would just bring my own personal version. And yeah, like I said, I think in that podcast we pretty much nailed, the where everything should be. I just think that there was a couple of leaders I maybe would have changed. So for those of you that didn't catch that podcast, I would 100% recommend jumping over to the Scrub Games YouTube channel to watch that. It's a great episode. Me and James from the Northeast Kai, obviously Jamie from Scrub Games. It was a really, really good and interesting conversation around all of Fusion World. So, for those of you that haven't seen it, I would recommend jumping over there and watch that. It is quite a long podcast. We won't deny that, but I think that a lot of the insights, hopefully, people will agree with, or it might, generate some discussion, which is obviously what we want as well. So, but yeah, so I think we're just going to jump into this right away. I want to try and keep this as limited as possible, maybe to like 10, 15 minutes most. So I'm going to start off with the starter leaders. So for me, we'll go for the red starter leader first. So for Goku, I'm going to pop this into B tier. I think the leader itself is good. It's decent enough and it's generic enough that future red cards could also hold a real place for this leader. So for me, it's one to watch. I think it's one that while doesn't do as much per se for the other two leaders, I think Beerus is very good at control, and U7 is very good for control while putting out damage. I just think it kind of has like a non-identity at the minute. I think it doesn't really know where it wants to sit. I still think, don't get me wrong, that the red cards are very good in the leader, and obviously if you combine this with TOP, you've got some serious defensive power without ever having to expend cards from hand, or at least spend as few as possible. So I think putting this at a solid B tier, I think is completely fine. I don't think we need to really consider this anywhere else. I think just in the middle, it's a good leader. It's got a good package of cards that goes into it. But yeah, I think currently, I just think that U7 does it better, and yeah, Beerus is a different playstyle, which we'll get into when we come down to that line. So I think B for that is pretty fair. So next we're going to go into the Vegeta leader. For those of you that have watched the podcast, we have this as a strong leader. This is a very, very good leader. I think it just Blue in general takes a really, really smart pilot to get the full potential out of it. If you get the full potential out of Vegeta, I would argue it's one of the best leaders in the format, personally. I think, obviously, when we're talking leaders, I think Frieza just generically is still the best. But I think as far as all blue leaders go, Vegeta is the best out of the three. I think it'll take some beating as a leader through its capability until they change the playstyle of Blue, where they don't have to sit around that 7 card hand anymore. I think Vegeta is just out the box is such a strong leader. It does definitely need a really good pilot to get the most out of this deck, but fortunately for us, we actually have who I would argue is one of the best players in the UK, Kashi. He is insane at every game he plays. I've had the I don't know if I would say the fortune of playing against it or if it's the misery. It depends on how you look at it. But when he brings the full power of this leader, it kind of shows us just how good this leader can actually be. So 100%, I think that this leader is definitely a strong leader. I don't think I would put it anywhere above that just because of what Blue has access to currently. I don't think it would be S tier. But yeah, I think right out the gate, it's one of the strongest leaders of the format. Um, and yeah, I again, you just need to get a bit of practice with the deck. But 35k leader, it draws on both sides. Again, once you can manipulate around that 7-8 card hand, I think the leader's almost unbeatable. It just has so much going for it. And then we'll jump into yellow for the starter leader. So Frieza for us was S tier or Z tier, however you want to call it. Obviously, I'll probably rename these some point during the video, but Frieza is, I would argue, the best leader of the set. I think it's the best deck of the set. I think its versatility in energy expenditure, defensive capabilities, its aggro, everything about Frieza gives you access to pivot your playstyle based on the matchup. And Frieza is a leader that very much requires matchup knowledge. If you're playing against green, for example, you kind of have to go quick and fast, and having the Ginyu package in the deck gives you that access. When you start going into Broly, for example, obviously it being a 25k leader, Ginyu package isn't necessarily the best way to play the deck, but you have so many 30ks, 40ks, even the boss monster. I think you just have to change your playstyle based on the match that you're up against. And I think Frieza, out of all of the leaders, just has the generic best matchup into everything. Like I think that it just runs cards that are good into all matches. I also think that U7 kind of does something similar, but we'll get to that in a minute. But yeah, I think that Frieza for sure is the S tier. I don't think I would put that anywhere else. And I would probably put it at the top of S tier. I think it's that good. Then we next go into Broly, which is also S tier. My thing was during that podcast was that I think that Frieza stands in a tier of its own. So putting Broly alongside of it, while I don't necessarily disagree, I just think that Frieza, as a tier list here, I would say that the gap between these two, for me personally, in my play experiences, it's a bit larger than what this would suggest. But yeah, Broly itself is absolutely monstrous. 25k defensively is so difficult to break down. And I'm really terrified of the new Senzu being card with this leader, because turning your leader into 30k for the turn is going to be really, really difficult to break down. And we're the whole point of Fusion World being a game of attrition. We're going to lose that war with Broly once it becomes a 30k leader. And I think that that's where the main strength of this leader is going to be really shown, will be in set 2. But in set 1 currently, I think Broly's just the best green deck. I think it does everything that Gohan wants to do, but with it having the defensive side of it being a 25k, meaning that yellow can't just slam 20ks and red can't just slam 20ks into it on repeat. But yeah, I think that Broly is one of those leaders which currently right now there's not a large card pool, obviously, so there's not a lot to play around with. There's not a lot to really test and change and swap. Obviously, there are things that you can change ratios wise, but genuinely, I think that Broly is one of the most difficult leaders to break down in the format. And obviously, you give up your draw and your awaken side for free, but if you have the 5-drop Goku on board, it's all free. You're just getting a draw and a plus 5k boost. Yeah, I think the leader is absolutely snapped. I do believe it's snapped. I think if it wasn't S tier, it would be at the top of A tier for sure. But I think again, based on the conversations we had on the Scrubs Games podcast, I'm a believer that it's definitely S tier. I just think that the gap between Frieza and Broly is larger than what having it side by side sort of suggests. We'll dive into the green leaders first, because obviously these are the ones that are pretty straightforward. I'm going to go into Gohan first because I have a lot that I want to say on the androids. So Gohan A tier, of course it is. Green just generically is so strong. There's no reason where this wouldn't be A tier, and I do think it generically is better than Vegeta. I think that the package that Green runs currently is better, and I also think that what we've seen in the reveals to date, the Green package is better. And it's still going to be stronger going into the next set, but yeah, I think Gohan defensively being a 35k once per turn is really strong. So I think that Gohan, while being A tier, and I know it's won quite a lot of events, but I just think that between these two Saiyan leaders, I think that Broly essentially gives you that better defensive element, whereas Gohan, I think, gives you the better offensive element to an extent. But in terms of their playstyles, they're very similar. There's just, like I said, that difference of defensively with Gohan, you have that buff once per turn. But I think everything I can say about Broly, I could also say about Gohan, except the 25k base leader. But yeah, I think Gohan is definitely A tier. I'm going to put something in here that a lot of people aren't going to like, but I think androids are better than Gohan. This was a big discussion point on the podcast for me. They are not a believer in this. They believe this to be sort of C tier, like casuals, things like that. I have put in enough games with androids to know that this leader is absolutely insane. The package as well is very good. Like Broly and Gohan will run very similar packages. There's next to no difference between the deck lists. Maybe a few cards here or there, but all in all, it's pretty much the same. The android list that I run is purely based on the androids archetype, but it's consistency of ramp every single turn, and it's capability to ramp multiple times in a turn for really cheap energy. Um, and getting to 6 energy in this deck, for me personally, it's easier than Gohan. I think Broly's technically easier because obviously you ramp from life, so you kind of get there probably roughly the same time as the Androids does. With you being a 25k leader with Broly, obviously that's an advantage as well. But I always find that my hand size in Broly is maybe between 8 and 10 cards until we get into those later turns, and then maybe it starts to dwindle a little bit, or maybe we can keep it roughly the same depending on how well my opponent's playing. But I think with androids, my hand size is always big. It's always big, and it's always consistently full of everything that I need to see. It could just be my build per se. It could just be the way that I've built it, and I do not see any issues with the ramp. I don't see any issues with defending, and I also am able to use my energy in those earlier turns. I feel better than Gohan and Broly can. Their turn 3, 4, and 5 are so similar. The Gohan and Broly, there's next to no changes. That it doesn't really matter on the match you're playing against. There might come a time where it does matter, obviously, when you're into like hard aggro matches, but it really doesn't change all that much. Like if I'm playing Broly and I'm into Vegeta, or if I'm into U7, or if I'm into Cooler, or any of those leaders, my playstyle just doesn't really change. It doesn't need to. The playstyle from what you would sort of assume would be the most optimal playlines, it's so good and it's so consistent, you don't really need to change it. With the androids, I love having the ability to actually change my playstyle while still being able to ramp for free. That's a huge bonus for me, and I think that androids is severely overlooked. Genuinely, when the second wave comes and I have all access to all the cards I want, I will be building androids in the TCG, like the proper physical game, and I'd love to take that to my locals. And obviously, like I said, James, who's at my locals, who was also on the Scrubs Games podcast, he hasn't had the chance to face this deck at its true power yet. Our green player is kind of stuck to the same so far. Maybe because he just doesn't have access to the Android cards that he needs. But yeah, I genuinely am a big believer that 17 and 18 is one of the best green decks. I still think Broly right now is better, but I think that Android is, for me personally, I just think it's better than Gohan. I can keep my hand size roughly at the same size as Gohan, but I get consistent ramps every single turn, and I'm able to put out a 30k attack without me having to have a board state set up where I get the benefit of just swinging at 30k. Whereas with Gohan, you're going to lose an energy unless you have the Goku on board. And the Goku can be removed, let's not forget. Like, Goku can be bounced back to hand, it can be negged to the point where it can die, it can be, popped in or put in rest to the point where my opponent can swing at it if I'm playing against yellow. Like, Androids relies on nothing of that. So I genuinely think that the Androids is definitely up there on the tier list. This is one of the reasons why I wanted to make this tier list, because the conversations that we had in the Scrubs Games podcast was very good, but I think both of them either haven't played against this at the peak level, or they're just they're so convinced that the Green Saiyans are just better, and it's a hard argument to make. It genuinely is. It's not. I wouldn't say that Android is like far and away, like the gap between androids and Gohan is massive. I would say it's very little, but I just like the playstyle of androids better than I like the playstyle of Gohan. And so far in the client, I genuinely, I think I've won probably. I think most of the games I've lost with androids has been to aggro. So I've lost like a game to Cooler, and I've lost a couple of games to Ginyu, but to everything else, I've never lost to. Yeah, I think that the leader is absolutely crazy, and I think that the in archetype stuff for the androids is also very, very strong if you build it correctly, and that's the key, if you build it correctly. But yeah, so we'll just move on from there. Sorry, excuse me. We'll move on from there, and we'll go on to the red leaders now. So Beerus for me, Beerus is C tier. The discussion we had was I have seen that Beerus tops a lot of events. It does top, but I can't personally, and again, this tier list is my own perspective, I can't personally get Beerus to work at the top level. I can even run this Goku leader better than I can run Beerus consistently. Beerus for me is a weird one because it's a crit leader. So if you end up going first, I just don't ever get the advantage of Beerus. I just don't get it. The awakened effect of the -10 is very good because it means that you can easily clear 30Ks and things like that. Like, you can really take them apart. But yeah, I can't seem to unlock the full power of Beerus. It's strange because to me it feels like it feels like the red archetype or the red cards that are available in the pool currently, they do synergize well with it, but I feel like it synergizes enough with the other leaders that I don't need the Beerus 10k. Like I don't need the minus 10. And the critical, while being nice, isn't always necessary. So yeah, I think I just prefer draw leaders in red right now. Um, and yeah, I struggle with Beerus personally. I don't really. I think at some point it will really fall out of the meta when people understand how to play against the deck. The matches I've lost with Beerus have felt completely one-sided. They've never felt like they were within my control or I misplayed to the point where something happened. I just think that generically, as a leader currently, I think for me personally, I think Beerus is the weakest out of all the red. But yeah, that being said, that's how I currently feel about Beerus. I am more than happy to sit and watch top tier gameplay to make people force me into being a believer, and I will 100%. I'm always open to criticism. I'm always open to feedback. I just think that Beerus, for me personally, I don't get it. I don't really understand its archetype. I just don't really understand its playstyle. For me, it's a C tier. U7, obvious A tier. I think that there is argument for this to be an S tier. I think it's the top of A tier as well. I don't think there is a single A tier deck I would put ahead of this. U7 is a draw powerhouse. It is very aggressive. It can build very wide boards, and yeah, it's for me. It's so good. The way that I've built U7 personally is specifically to deal with the two S tier decks. So I can deal with Frieza against Broly. I put in enough 20 or 20Ks that become 25Ks to make them all threats into Broly. So, and because Broly tends to obviously go down to 3 life when they awaken, we only have to push 3 damage after they awaken, not 4, which is a huge advantage. Um, and I think that the deck that I put together for U7 breaks that down very well. And that's pretty much all I can really say about U7. It builds a wide board. It has some negatives, like all red does, where we tend to run quite a few 0k combos. We also run extra cards as well. So if we're tapping out, there are times where we can have half of our hand can be dead cards. But that's more player specific. You need to play around what access or what resources you currently have. But that being said, I think red also runs more 10Ks than any other color. I think green maybe runs more 10Ks depending on. In fact, no, I don't think it does. I really don't think it does. I think potentially blue does. Between the Pilafs and the Self Awakeners. I'm trying to think of other 10Ks that they've got. The Trunks 30k that bounces back to hand if you're in the Trunks leader, or at bottom decks, after it attack or at the end of the turn after it attacks. Yeah, I just think that defensively, U7 can really hold up well defensively, and it just outputs so much damage and so much pressure that my opponent's either going to spend their entire hand defending, or they're going to start taking the damage to the point where I only now need to push through 1 damage between what will likely be 4 or 5 attacks. But yeah, and I think so far the reveals for red, the Kayla, the Kefla, whichever one it is, that you pay 4, you draw 1. It's a 25k attacker. It is U6, so it will not get the benefit from this leader, but we can then play out the 3-drop TN from the new set as well, from the Kayla, the Kefla's effect. I think it's a Kefla. We can play out that TN, which will get the buff from the U7 leader, but that TN also plays out the 1-drop TNs, and those 1-drop TNs also get the buff from our leader. So with 4 energy, we can put out 2 25k attackers and 2 to 3 20k attackers, all for 4 energy. It's really crazy how aggro this deck could potentially get in the next set. But what you have to bear in mind is, one, you need to see those pieces. You need to see them all at the same time. You need a lot of stars need to align for that to work. And also the amount of cards that you play out means it's less cards in hand to defend. So I think there's going to be a balance in that next set for U7, but genuinely I think that the new stuff coming out could potentially make U7 into the S tier for sure. I think it's on the brink of being S tier currently. Yeah, I think that this is another leader that's not necessarily been overlooked. It is topping events, but I think that there would be more people on it if green wasn't such a boogeyman at the minute. And I also think that when we talk about the tier list, green isn't as scary as it used to be. I think a lot of players, including myself, I think that genuinely I'm able to break down green a lot better than when I first started. But green is still scary. It's still a scary color because of course it is. But yeah, I think Red U7 can deal with the androids. It can deal with the Gohan, and it can deal into Broly pretty well if you build it correctly. You just have to spend that extra energy to get out 25k attackers, and then every attack's a threat, and that's kind of the way that I've built the deck, and I genuinely believe that it's top of A tier for sure. So we'll jump into the yellow leaders now. I'm actually going to start with Cooler. Cooler is such a strange one for me. I have seen Cooler top events. I have watched gameplay of Cooler. I have played games of Cooler, and I still don't understand how it wins and how it does it successfully. I understand the gimmick is obviously we can attack multiple times with our big bodies. That's fine, but with it not being a draw leader, your hand size is always small, meaning that every time you discard to restand, it leaves you vulnerable. Cooler for me is iffy. I think I'm going to put it at C tier. For me, I would even argue that it could be D tier. I don't think it is, but there is an argument for that to be there. I just think that Cooler for me just has really no identity currently. The Cooler package, like the Cooler squad stuff, is terrible. Nothing in there really benefits this leader. None of them have effects. Like even the leader doesn't have effect that like boosts the the attack power or makes them cheaper or anything. I don't really get what this leader's for besides the critical. Yeah, I think it's great. It's one of these situations where I'm open to be convinced that it's better than what I'm saying it is. But as we were talking about, obviously I know I'm putting it in C tier and I'm saying that the leader's great, but we were talking about it on the podcast saying that all of the leaders are competitively viable. There's no argument here that every leader is competitively viable within the right hands. In my hands and in my experience, Cooler for me is one of the worst. But that's just me. We'll go to Ginyu now. I'm going to put Ginyu at the end of A tier. I think Ginyu is very, very strong. It's really good into 20k leaders. It has a glaring weakness into Broly, and in the next set, it's got a glaring weakness into all green because of Senzu. So Senzu for 2 energy, turning your leader into 25k means that Ginyu is in deep, deep trouble. Ginyu cannot deal with 25k leaders. It's too many resources. They play out too many battle cards, meaning that their hand size, yes, they have access to the extra card that draws them too. It's not enough. It's not going to be enough into a 25k leader. So for now, in this meta, Ginyu is A tier, for sure. I think it has great matchups across the board out of all of this. Red, for me, can deal with it probably better than any other color because, while we play a battle card, which is also a threat, we can kill a battle card, which is a threat. So, the 3-cost Goku, for example, will kill something 20k or less, and then I can swing with the U7 leader a 30k into a 20. And if you're going to save that, it's cards from your hand. I've also got my leader swing, which can clear a battle card. So I think Ginyu is great. I just think that it plays into Blue's strategy of wanting to be around 7 cards. So while yes, it's great into a 20k leader, Blue can maneuver around that 7-card hand very, very well if you play it correctly. And I think that Ginyu pushes them to do that, and I think it ultimately works in Blue's favor. And then Gohan, Androids, and Broly being the exception here, but ramp decks are inherently slow. That's what they are. Ginyu is quick and it's aggressive and it can win games by turn 4 on 4 energy. It can win games that quickly. It's such a powerhouse of a leader, but I think it will fail next set, and I think that's where my issue is with it. But if for the purposes of this tier list, we'll call this set 1 tier list, right? I think Ginyu is A tier for sure. I just think it's at the end of A tier. We'll go into the blue cards, or blue leaders next. Trunks for me is a weird one. I think, again, like I was sort of going around with blue, the gimmick of 7 cards doesn't work all that well with Trunks. I also think that Trunks arguably is the deck that can punish you the least out of all the blue decks. But that being said, I think that the leader effect isn't that great. Obviously, you can bounce back your cards and you can replay things. You can bounce back some threats to your opponent's hand. Yes, that's all true. But I just don't think it's that great. And I think if I'm looking at leaders into specific matchups, I think Trunks has the weakest matchup across the board. There are certain matchups where it's very strong into. I think the blue Trunks is very good into red, for an example. You know, bouncing 0k combos into hand is absolutely insane because your opponent, yes, they could just re-establish it next turn, but they're gonna have to dedicate their whole turn to that. Um, and yeah, bouncing a 0k combo hand means if your opponent's on 8 cards, you know that one of those cards at least is a 0k, and there's a good chance that multiple are. But I think into yellow, yellow can establish a board so quickly. Green doesn't ever really establish a board, so the only cards that you can bounce back to hand, or that you should bounce back to hand, are your own. Yes, you can bounce back the cantrips, but that's pretty much it. There's not really much else green runs besides maybe the Trunks blocker. I think if you're running an optimized list, you shouldn't be running that blocker anyway. And I also think that the 2-drop Goku, I believe it is, the one that's like a 20, or maybe a Trunks actually, is a 25k, but it doesn't attack leaders. Yes, you can bounce that back to hand, but it's a 10k combo that you're adding back to their hand. And honestly, I don't think they care about it. I think that they put that card out there for one turn, expecting it to survive one turn. I don't think they're always putting cards out expecting to get multiple turns out of it. Um, because of that, I am going to put Trunks in D tier, but I'm going to caveat this by saying that Trunks has the potential in future sets. Out of all of the blue leaders, I think Trunks is the best for future proofing. I think that there is a possibility that Trunks is going to come right back into the meta. It could even be the top of the meta at some point, depending on, again, blue's cards and if it sticks to this 7-card gimmick. Which I hope it doesn't. I really hope it doesn't. I don't like that handicap on a color personally. But yeah, that's for me. Trunks is a strange one. I love the deck. I have fun when I play the deck. I just, whenever I play the other two blue leaders, I always consistently win much more than I do with Trunks. And that's my sole reason for it. And then if we go to Goku Black, I'm going to put Goku Black in B tier. I think Goku Black is one of the difficult blue decks to pilot. It does have the advantage of it not being a draw leader, meaning that playing around that 7-card hand is almost a guarantee all the time. But that being said, the effect where you bottom deck as a Zamasu to play out a Goku Black for cheap. Right now, the 6-drop is a great target to play, of course it is. The 6-drop's absolutely insane. The 4-cost vanilla is just a generic 30k beat stick for 2 energy, which is good, but it then costs 3 energy if you don't have a Zamasu already established. And that is inherently the problem with Goku Black, is that you have to then pay the energy to establish the Zamasu, to then bottom deck the Zamasu and then play out the Goku Black, right? So at minimum, if you don't have a Zamasu on the board, you're paying 3 energy to get that 30k out on the board. Honestly, it's not that great. That's not great value for 3 energy. I would much rather, if you look at red as the example, for the exact same energy, I can kill a battle card 20k or less, and I have a 30k attacker with the leader skill for the same energy. It's just inherently so much stronger. For me, Goku Black's a weird one. I think it's a very, very difficult deck to pilot, but I do think that the risk reward is there. I think that if you play the deck perfectly, you can actually beat out a lot of matchups. And the great thing about this deck is that when you extend into the longer game and you're able to play out your Goku Blacks, if you can get there before any of green gets to 8 energy, you're sitting very comfortable. You know, you're going to start swinging for 40s. You can clear board easily enough. You know, you can start building a board because the Goku Black plays things. You know, the 6-drop will play a 4 or less from hand every time it attacks, as long as you're at 7 or fewer cards. But like I said, that is not a handicap in a crit leader because you don't draw. And it's the difference again with Trunks, is that I think that Trunks ends up with too many cards in hand. I mean, every time I've went to Awaken with Trunks, I could be at 11, 12, 13 cards in hand, which in any other leader is beautiful, or any other color is beautiful. But for blue, it's actually a downside. It can technically be a handicap. But Goku Black is very good. I think it requires some setup, which is a problem. But the 20k leader, and then as Jamie was rightly saying the other day there on the podcast, that you can just keep Final Hope slashing your leader and keep him as a critical, and then you can peel off loop your Final Hope slashes and just keep swinging 40k crits, which is always nice, and I think it's a very strong playline. I just don't know how viable that is going into set 2. That's my thing. There's not enough reveals yet so far for the blue cards. Obviously the time ring or whatever it's called, that's a nice card, but I don't know how viable it'll be competitively. But it is a nice card, and I think that genuinely Goku Black for me, I think is B tier because I've played against some insane Goku Black players through the client. Some people, I've been matched up against who were God rank with Goku Black, and they play the deck to a T. And while I've beat it more times than I've lost to it, even at those higher ranks, the games were never one-sided. Whereas with Trunks, I think that quite often it can be one-sided. And with Vegeta, again, if you play it right, Vegeta should never be one-sided. Vegeta should always be the most competitive out of the three blue leaders. Personally, that's just my take on it. We're going to rename these, right? So this is going to be what we'll just call Z tier. Oh. Yeah, there we go. A tier, we're going to call it competitive, right? Actually, we'll call it will top events for sure, because we know that these leaders are capable of topping events. The B tier is can top events. It's possible to see them there. C tier, again, I know it's quite ironic because I'm putting Beerus in this C tier. I'll just put unlikely to top, or maybe just Rogue. Actually, we'll just call this Rogue, right? We'll call it Rogue. And then D tier, I'm not going to call it trash. I'm going to say room for improvement, right? This is what we're going to go with. Like I said, I don't think that any leader here is particularly terrible. I think that they're all competitively viable. They can all top events. They all, I believe, have topped events. I don't think there's a single leader that hasn't been in a top cut out of all the events so far. But I think that Trunks just lacks a little bit. There's just something that it needs to get it to that echelon where it's not even Rogue, it's can top events or will top events. I think that that's what we're going to see. But yeah, I'm happy with this tier list. I think that Frieza and Broly are monstrosities of themselves. When they are played perfectly, they're so difficult to break down. My list with U7 currently, because I'm a red player for those of you that don't know. My list for U7 currently is very, very, very strong, and it's peppered to just deal with Frieza and Broly. If it can deal with Frieza and Broly, it can deal with everything else in this meta, right? That's the way that this deck is built. So this one for me is, do you know what? I am putting this in Z tier. I think it is. I think U7 is Z tier. I can't. Everything I'm going to explain about U7 means it has to be Z tier, because if it's capable of beating the Z tier, it has to be in there, right? Not to say that none of these aren't capable of beating them, but I think that U7 is uniquely in a position where it can actually deal with these two very well compared to the other red decks and compared to the other decks. I think Gohan, there is also argument for Gohan. I'm going to leave this where it is, right, with androids and Gohan. A lot of people would do this, 100%, and this could even be here or here, right? That's just what a lot of people would do. But I have enough experience with androids to know just how strong that deck really is. And again, I could get slaughtered in the comments for this, but genuinely, if you've been looking at my channel and you've watched the couple of games that I've put up of Android 17 and 18, the games weren't really even close. At least not to the point where it was full set panic and I won by a 5k combo. Like, it wasn't anything like that. It was always realistically in control. And the times where it was out of control was where I was on like 4 life, so I didn't ever feel like I was in kill range. It's one of those things. Again, it's just experience with the deck pretty much. But I think androids and Gohan definitely tier 1, if you would call it that, or tier 1.5. I think if I was to name this as like a number list, we'd have tier 1, 1.5, tier 2, and Rogue, and then again room for improvement. Something that maybe room for improvement's not the right term. Maybe it's something like won't top currently, but or it has topped currently, but needs the right pilot and it needs the right matchups to get it from round 1, let's say, through all the way through round 5 and 6 to get into that top cut. If you're facing an army of Brolys, Gohan's not going to help. Trunks is not going to do well. It just won't. Whereas I think a lot of these leaders, if they face all of these Z tier, they have the ability to win the match. They just need the matchup knowledge, and that is ultimately the most important thing in Fusion World, is matchup knowledge. Knowing what your cards do and knowing what the cards are good into is the key there, and ultimately that's what will win you matches. But yeah, this is the tier list, guys. Like I said, there'll be a lot of people who agree and a lot of people who disagree with this. It's fine if you agree or disagree. I don't mind. Yeah, it's all for fun at the end of the day. So, but let me know what you think. If you guys agree or disagree, or if there's any parts of this where you think I'm absolutely insane. Like I said, I'm open to criticism. I'm open to conversation. And yeah, this is just my take personally based on the amount of games I've put in the client and the games that I've had in person. Um, yeah, and that's pretty much it. So, but thank you very much for joining, guys. This will likely be a one-off at least until the next set comes round. There maybe will be room to change this after the meta properly climatizes. You know, maybe towards the end of April, maybe do another one just to sort of show you how I feel that the tier list is currently. But yeah, I think for now this is a great tier list. I think it shows everything where it should be. And yeah, again, I think I think that this is pretty good. I'm happy with this now that I'm looking at it. We had a good conversation on the Scrubs Games podcast, and obviously, like I said at the beginning, everybody will have different takes on the tier list. And this is just where I sit with mine. But anyway, thank you very much for watching, guys, and I will see you in the next video.